Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to finish off our conversation on Act 4 of Othello by considering Act 4, Scene 3, paying particular attention to the Willow song that Desdemona sings that she learned from a maid named Barbary who served her mother. This act begins with Othello demanding that Desdemona retire to her chambers, dismiss her servant Emilia, Iago's wife, and then wait for Othello's arrival. Now, Desdemona seems to have been so cowed she seems subconsciously to recognize that he is coming to kill her. She has been so attenuated, she's been so affected, she has been rendered so distraught that she now waits for her own death, subconsciously recognizing that it is approaching her passively. She has been stripped of all the authority, the command, the dignity that she possessed at the beginning of this play, when she valiantly and confidently spoke out against her father before the Duke. There's been a fundamental transformation of her character for the worse as she begins to embrace or to embody the kinds of stereotypes or expectations for women that were imposed upon them. Again, this is meant to be, because this is the subject of a tragic narrative and because it is the result of Iago, a villain's machinations, a kind of, well, tragedy in itself, something abhorrent and disturbing to us. So she says in line 21, "All's one, good faith, how foolish are our minds! If I do die before thee, prithee shroud me in one of these same sheets. Prithee shroud me in the wedding sheets that I asked you to put on my bed." So Desdemona here says, how foolish are our minds. We don't know what she's thinking at this moment, what thought to which she refers when she says that her mind is acting foolishly. But I think we recognize that she's alluding to this fear that she has that Othello plans to return to kill her because of the violence that he has already demonstrated towards her, because of the cruelty that he has displayed. Prithee shroud me in one of these same sheets. That symbolic resonance that we discussed in the last video is at work again. Desdemona, it is revealed here, is very much like her husband. Remember that Othello, in that defining line in Act 1, Scene 2, said that I fetch my life and being from men of royal siege. Everything that I am, from animal to human, identity to base subsistent existence, is a result of the affirmation that I receive from the men who are superior to me, the rulers of this nation. Desdemona thinks in the same terms. Her life and her being, her definitional chastity and her animal life, her reputation, her honor, her integrity, the perception of her chastity that is embodied physically and that is external to herself, in essence, just like reputation, is one and the same with her life. If I die, bind me up in the wedding sheets, which are a symbolic representation of my chastity, my purity, my fidelity, and my devotion to Othello. One and the same. They should both die, because there's really no difference between them. Or if my chastity isn't there, if I don't have this element of my character that I've viewed as definitional any longer, not because I don't actually possess it, not because I'm not chaste, but because other people don't view me that way, then my life is meaningless. I don't have a life. Othello spoke in the same kind of terms about his reputation and his identity. What follows is an extensive, intimate, personal conversation between Emilia and Desdemona, two women who have been stripped of voice and are now confined to a purely private mode of existence by overbearing and malicious husbands. However, in this moment, they find a kind of comfort in their ability to speak freely with one another. And their conversation ranges through a myriad of different subjects wherein they express internalities that have been suppressed or have been denied entry into public conversation. So, for instance, Emilia speaks frankly about her sexual desire for other men. And they discuss different perspectives on marriage, duty to their husbands, the liberty that they are granted or that they are denied, the kind of community that they can have or that they are denied, the sexual desirability of other men, and infidelity. Now, regardless of the substance of their conversation or Shakespeare's intentions in articulating these ideas to us, whichever side of this conversation he falls on, or whatever liminal space he tries to occupy between these positions, trying to synthesize them into some kind of cohesive argument, There is range and scope and place for this multiplicity of ways of being for these two women. Their different perspectives, their different desires are on display to us, and it represents to us women who have a kind of internal complexity and a variation of character and potential ways of being that for a moment suggest that these things might be rendered into reality. The fundamental, irreducible complexity of the female condition, of the status of women, is presented to us in all of its variegated forms and with its varied passions and opportunities and possibilities. That complexity can be nothing less than fully human. And yet, this conversation takes place with the subconscious recognition that both of these characters are going to be silenced by their husbands. There is no possibility for this one shining moment of private empathy and connection to endure, to last. The Willow Song itself connects both of these women who are living now to a history that is carried forward through art and song. It ties them in this continuity of wronged women. As Desdemona sings the Willow Song, Shakespeare seems to be opening up this one last moment, this last gesture towards a possible positive resolution for the situation in which the characters find themselves. Emilia and Desdemona, who have been wronged by their husbands, now find a kind of solace in their connection with preceding generations. They recognize and construct a community of empathy. We have all these different experiences, and we have different perspectives on the world, fundamentally on wide-ranging subjects from sex to marriage to men and duty, liberty, the role of the woman, the value of chastity, material desire, and more. But through open, honest conversation, we can actually rest a community, one that exists not in the public because we're denied access to that, but maybe we can rest a new kind of community, a new kind of way of being for ourselves, for women, as we connect with prior generations based on our shared experience of trauma. And that's what allowed Desdemona, through the telling of Othello's story of his life, to connect with him and to forge a relationship with him. She pitied him because she could empathize with the way in which he was mistreated by society as an oppressed woman and as a black man. And together, they strove to forge a place for themselves in the world. And here, Desdemona, Emilia, the maid named Barbary, and the woman who is featured in Barbary's song all seem to do the same as they construct a new community, a new way of connecting with people. Now, Desdemona sings this song, but she sings it incorrectly. She interjects at numerous points to say, no, I've missung it. I have substituted a verse where one should not belong. So in line 36, the poor soul sat sighing by a sycamore tree. Sing all a green willow, her hand on her bosom, her head on her knee. Sing willow, willow, willow. The fresh streams ran by her and murmured her moans. Sing willow, willow, willow. Her salt tears fell from her and softened the stones. Sing willow. And then she speaks and interrupts the song. Lay by these, sings willow, willow, speaks. Prithee, hie thee, hurry up. He'll come anon, he'll come soon. Then sings, sing all a green willow must be my garland. Let nobody blame him, his scorn I approve. Then speaks, no, nay, that's not next. Hark, who is that knocks? No, that's not the next verse. I've misremembered the lyrics to the song, and I've substituted something that comes later into this moment. And then she thinks she hears someone at the door. And Emilia says, no, it's the wind. I called my love, Desdemona sings, false love. But what said he then? Sing willow, willow, willow. If I court more women, you'll couch with more men. And speaks, so get thee gone, good night, mine eyes do itch. Doth that boat weeping? 'Tis neither here nor there. I have heard it said so. Oh, these men, these men. So the Willow Song is taken up. It's a song sung by a maid named Barbary that Desdemona had when she was a child. And the song itself is speaking of a woman who is sitting by the river weeping because the man with whom she was in love has been unfaithful to her. We can assume, we can posit that the maid, Barbary, sang that song because it resonated with her. It spoke to her own situation. And so through art, this rarefied medium, just like the medium of story that Othello used to connect with Desdemona, we have this connection between succeeding generations of women who have been denied voice, who have been betrayed, who have been mistreated by men. And there's that moment of connection between all of them. But it's fleeting, it's temporary, and Desdemona recognizes that fact as there are interjections of the mundane world that ground the rarefied air of the song. But Desdemona reformulates the song. She transforms it into something that better speaks to her own experiences, revealing the orientation of her mind and her own thoughts. So as she's singing, "Hurry up, he'll come soon," that thought causes her to reformulate the song because, again, subconsciously she knows that Othello is coming to kill her. "Let nobody blame him his scorn I approve." Nay, that's not next. No, I've transposed a verse or a line from later on in the song. And she's done that because, again, it's a reflection of how she thinks. Let nobody blame him. In her own back of her mind, she's thinking, let nobody blame Othello. His scorn I approve. I accept my own death. This is the degree to which she has been stripped of her agency and repressed by Iago's machinations. And again, I would assert that this is not a kind of morality tale about, Desdemona married against her father's wishes, so yeah, she's dying. That's fair. No, this is Shakespeare showing us something that was true and beautiful and good in the relationship between Desdemona and Othello. A man who loved Desdemona because he could empathize with her and she could empathize with him. They could understand one another and pity each other's situations. It's a story about two people who were genuinely in love, who have been destroyed because of their own underlying insecurities. And that is meant to be represented, or it's meant to be received by us, I would argue, as a tremendous injustice. Desdemona and Emilia then enter into a conversation about fidelity or chastity, and they have a disagreement. Desdemona asks, "Dost thou in conscience think, tell me, Emilia, that there be women who do abuse their husbands in such gross kind? Do you think that there are unfaithful women?" Desdemona almost can't conceive of it. Emilia says, "I think that there are." Desdemona asks, "Do you really? I don't understand that perspective on the world. Allow me to try to understand it. Allow us to try to form this connection and to better understand our respective positions." Emilia, "Why? Don't you think so?" "No, by this heavenly night. Nor I neither by this heavenly light, but I might well do it in the dark. If I could get away with it, I might do it myself. I was just telling you how I found another man sexually desirable aside from my own husband." Desdemona, "Wouldst thou do such a thing for all the world? Would you sacrifice your chastity?" Because remember, for Desdemona, chastity and identity and life, they're all bound up together. They're one thing. If I gave up my chastity, it would be like I was killing myself. The world's a huge thing, and it is a great price for such a small vice. It seems like a small price to pay to gain the world. "God's troth, I think thou wouldst not. By my troth, I think I should, and undo it when I had done. Marry, I would not do such a thing for a joint ring, nor for measures or lawns, nor of gowns, petticoats, nor caps. I wouldn't sell my chastity for something small, like a gown or a ring, but for the whole world. Who wouldn't do that?" Now, Emilia seems to suggest here that the infidelity or the failings of women are ultimately the fault of their husbands, not because women lack moral agency, but, well, because they have learned to behave poorly from their husbands. They have been mistreated by their husbands. So she says, say that these husbands, in line 82, say that they slack their duties and pour out treasures into foreign laps. Say that they give out gifts to other women and are unfaithful to us. Say that they break out into peevish jealousies, like Othello has, when you, Desdemona, gave him no cause to doubt your chastity, your fidelity to him. Say that they break out in jealousy, throwing restraint upon us. Say that they're cruel to us and restrain us unjustly. Or say that they strike us or scant our former havings in despite. Say that they're violent towards us. Why? We have galls, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Don't think that that husbands or men generally can mistreat us women and expect us to behave as if they hadn't. We are just like men in that we have a desire for revenge that needs to be satisfied. So don't think that you can wrong us and not see a kind of reciprocal response. And though we have some grace, we have some revenge. Let husbands know their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. So we have our desires for sweetness and sour things, and this ranges through an entire spectrum of sexual desire and all forms of inclinations. Don't we have the same desires as men? What is it that they do when they change us for another's? What is it that they do when they betray us because they desire another woman? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? Is it a kind of game to them? Yes, it is. And does a kind of base affection in their natures, an emotional drive, lust, does that drive them? Yes, it does. I think it does. And is it frailty that thus errs? Is it a weakness in them that they do this? Yes. And have we not affections, desires for sport and frailty as men have? Aren't all those faculties shared equally by men and women? I think they are. So then let them use us well, or else let them know the ills we do, their ills instruct us so. And it's not because men have failed to restrain women or imposed controls upon them. It's not some sort of subtle validation of a patriarchal system of control over women. It's the exact opposite. It's that men and women are exactly the same in their drives, their desires, their needs for comfort and intimacy. So if men are prone to these frailties and failings and mistreat us as a result, how can they expect us, because of our common humanity, to do anything else? Now, Desdemona rejects this perspective. She takes a higher road, as she did with Othello in Act 1, Scene 2. Good night, God me such uses send, not to pick bad from bad, but by bad mend. God, send me such uses, send me such things into my life, such mistreatment, not so that I can learn how to respond in kind or to seek revenge, but so that I can learn to be more empathetic, more sympathetic, that I, who have known what oppression and cruelty and injustice is, can look on others who are being mistreated and respond with a greater or expanded sense of empathy and compassion towards them, because I know what it is that they're experiencing. The play does not necessarily validate either of these two perspectives, because in their own ways, both women achieve some good and demonstrate some kind of nobility through their respective actions born from these two perspectives in Act 5. Amelia is going to learn from her husband how to mistreat him, or at least how to respond in kind to his cruel acts. Desdemona, on the other hand, is going to learn from Othello's cruelty to be more forgiving, to be more empathetic, and to be more open. This kind of complexity in the representation of women, these, again, variegated responses to their husbands, shows the ineffable quality of humanity in them. They're fundamentally different characters. Neither of them can be reduced down to the kinds of stereotypes that Iago attempts to impose upon them. They're two fundamentally different kinds of women, like those four kinds of women that Iago described. But they can't be reduced down to a stereotype, a type, or a figure. They resist that kind of reductive reading of their character. What Shakespeare does here for Emilia and Desdemona, allowing them to subvert Iago's victory, is what he's going to do for Othello in Act 5.